in the year of our Lord, somewhere vaguely between the bubonic inconveniences and the great cheese shortages of the 1300s, humanity found itself curiously inclined toward altering the mind or not with haste, precision, or much success. This was an age of murky tea leaves, questionable fumigation methods, and monks with more time than sense. The chronicles herein detail the life and experiments of Sir Hedwig of Droz, a man not renowned for his intellect, charm, nor hygiene. These are not stories of triumph, discovery, or excitement, but chronicles of deeply average minds pursuing transcendence, one sneeze and leech poultice at a time, but who dedicated his days to the slow, yawning study of herbal elevations and mental cloudiness, his journals scribbled half-heartedly by the perpetually napping scribe. Ethelbert, the sleepy contained tales so soporific they were once weaponized by the monastic order of restorative boredom. You shall read of goat-pipe rituals, turnip-induced hallucinations, and the great feather debacle of the Feast of St. Barnaby. So wrap thyself in a woolen blanket, perch upon your hay-stuffed mattress, and surrender to the gentle absurdity of the drowsy herb chronicles, where highs are tepid, the pacing is glacial, and the excitement is entirely optional. In the 33rd week of the year 1347, Sir Hedwig of Drowsley awoke, not with vigour, but with a dull ache in his elbow and an even duller idea. He had recently stumbled foliage growing beneath the eastern parapet of the Abbey's latrine wall. Its scent was described by Friar Nubbins as a bit like wet wool and lingering decisions. He coughed once, then blinked thrice. The herb was soon named goatweed, largely because the local goats refused to eat it, unless bribed with hymeneals dipped in mead. Convinced this peculiar plant held otherworldly potential, Sir Hedwig hypothesized that smoking it in a hollowed turnip might lead to minor enlightenment, or at the very least, inexplicable humming. The inaugural inhalation ceremony was conducted at dusk, during the village's weekly not-yet-plague celebration, featuring tepid cider and a sack race judged by staring. A vessel was constructed using a scorched turnip, 3 strands of monk hair, and the wax seal from a discontinued royal cheese decree. Sir Hedwig took 3 puffs. "What dost thou see?" asked Ethelbert the sleepy, having just woken up halfway through the ritual. "I feel a presence," whispered Hedwig, "like a goose that knows my name but is unwilling to say it aloud." Historians remain divided on whether this constituted success. This vague pronouncement was immediately recorded in the Chronicle of Subtle Transcendence, a scroll barely longer than an onion and just as pungent. Later that evening, Hedwig wandered into the local orchard and tried to converse with a tree about ecclesiastical embroidery. The tree did not reply. It was the 5th day of slightly damp season when Sir Hedwig, having misplaced his left shoe for 3 consecutive fortnights, declared a new research initiative. Let us explore infusions of herbs, not smoked but steeped, as water might unlock their softer mutterings. Ethelbert, the sleepy, barely conscious beneath a pile of alphabetically sorted moss, muttered I, and retrieved the monastery Esli's used vessel, a chipped ceramic teacup depicting St. Barnaby riding an otter into theological battle. The resulting brew was warm, beige, and intellectually disappointing. Thus began the teacup trials. First infusion: goatweed, sage crumbs, 3 eyelashes from the local stable boy, and a ceremonial dunk of 1 stale oat biscuit. Hedwig, determined to commune with the unseen voice, entered the cupboard with his teacup and a bag of dried gooseberries. Hedwig sipped, he waited, he yawned, then he reported, "I hear a whisper. It speaks from inside the broom cupboard." Hedwig asked it 3 questions. The broom cupboard in question, located near the latrine corridor, was known for its eerie creaks and tendency to smell faintly of decisions not taken. Inside, he claimed to encounter a floating presence known as the Oracle of Mild Clarity, who appeared briefly in a cloud shaped like a confused biscuit. What lies beyond the veil of ordinary thought? How many goats? Is too many goats? Where did my left shoe wander? The oracle responded in riddles so unspecific that Ethelbert mistakenly recorded them as local weather predictions. One scroll reads simply, "And a brief incident where he mistook a hedgehog for an emissary of woodland truth. Expect wind. Avoid frogs." Later, analysis of Hedwig's journal reveals that the only measurable effect of the teacup infusions was a sudden fascination with pickled turnips. Thus ended the teacup trials. The villagers remained unimpressed. The harvest moon had risen in semi-confident fashion, casting a pale glow on the village of Drowsley, where enthusiasm was routinely avoided. Under such unremarkable light, Sir Hedwig convened an assembly of curious souls for what he dubbed the Congregation of the Slightly Glazed, named not for spiritual enlightenment, but for the snacks. Dame Mildred, still limping with pride from her earlier goatweed trial, had recently baked a batch of infused vision biscuits, incorporating sage, nutmeg, one dramatic sneeze, and crumbs from a scroll containing forgotten psalms. Hedwig saw this as a prime opportunity to induce communal mental 12 villagers and one confused goat attended the ritual. Each participant was given a biscuit and instructed to chew with thoughtful intention, but no urgency. After 23 minutes of gentle nibbling, reports began to trickle in. Mildred claimed to see a dancing bishop made of fog, offering high fives in Latin. Old Page, the baker, described a loud memory of bells that never rang. The goat attempted to eat the ceremonial rug, which was later deemed a vision in itself. Sir Hedwig, meanwhile, experienced the sensation of being lightly tapped on the soul by something resembling a musical sheep. He wrote in his journal, "I am not enlightened, but I believe I have reached the emotional equivalent of lukewarm porridge." The ritual was prematurely ended when Friar Nubbins stepped on a rake and loudly accused the moon of conspiratorial behavior. Most villagers dispersed in polite silence, and the goat later led a procession into the orchard for reasons unknown. To commemorate the event, Ethelbert the Sleepy compiled a short pamphlet titled Mildred's Biscuits and Other Soft Hallucinations, which was widely unread but made an excellent coaster. Autumn crept upon drowsily as Friar Nubbins rising from a bin-induced nap. The leaves turned a hue, best described as enthusiastic beige, and Sir Hedwig announced a new quest, to speak with the sighing stone rumoured to reside in Melancholy Field, a small meadow famous for hosting weddings that were later downgraded to cordial misunderstandings. Legend spoke of a stone that could emit audible sighs when approached with humility in a ham sandwich. Hedwig, ever devoted to the pursuit of herbal transcendence, believed the stone to be an ancient receptor of ambient thought frequencies, or possibly just bored. Accompanied by Ethelbert the Sleepy, Dame Mildred, and a background bard who had forgotten all his chords, Hedwig set forth. Upon arrival, the stone was discovered half buried near a patch of emotionally distant mushrooms. Ethelbert transcribed it as, Hedwig knelt, placed a single wilted fern upon its surface, and whispered, "O stone of sighs, reveal thy wisdom." The stone emitted a sound akin to a weary hiccup, and claimed it whispered his childhood nickname, Bumble. No records support this assertion. Interpreting this as profound, Hedwig launched into philosophical ramblings about the spiritual inertia of sediment, the potential dream life of moss, and whether mildew holds regret. Dame Mildred, inspired by the moment, attempted to commune with the mushrooms. They remained silent, though Cruton stared pointedly at one, and later charged a wheelbarrow. The experiment concluded when Friar Nubbins tripped over the stone that evening. Hedwig wrote, "The stone has spoken. It sighs for us all. Or perhaps it just misses being upright." As the calendar rolled into the month of mistaken Lent, the villagers of Drewsley prepared for a cherished tradition, the Festival of Forgetting, a celebration known for its peculiar potions, scattered memories, and the noble aim of misremembering one's neighbor's name for an entire Each vial was color-coded but unlabeled, accompanied only by a poetic couplet of dubious relevance. Examples included, Sir Hedwig, ever eager to contribute to the collective haze, unveiled his newest creation, the bag of unhelpful potions. Green vial, to see the stars upon thy knees, drink thrice beneath confused trees. Purple vial, a taste of time and mild regret, will make thee think thy goat a pet. Beige vial, forget thy name, but know thy elbows. Old Parsnip took a yellow one, briefly believed he was a haystack, and lay motionless until sunset. Friar Nubbins consumed two at once, and declared himself the ambassador of sighs, communicating exclusively in long exhalations. Villagers lined up with cautious optimism. Mildred drank a blue potion and spent 3 hours politely arguing with a flagpole about theology. The highlight of the festival was the potion parade, wherein participants staggered gently through the village with ribbons tied to things that might have been intentions. Hedwig rode atop a cart filled with empty teacups, humming a tune he claimed was taught to him by the Sighing Stone. Ethelbert the Sleepy, true to form, forgot to wake up and recorded the entire event via ink blots and facial impressions in bread. By dusk, most villagers had forgotten why they came, what they drank, and whether Mildra's goat was real or metaphorical. Hedwig's journal entry for the day read, "Let us wear none and rejoice. Memories are but decorative socks in the drawer of existence." On the third Tuesday of the festival of decidedly mild breezes, Sir Hed stumbled upon a lone figure seated beside the sighing stone. A bard named Thomblin, whose reputation for musical disinterest was whispered with surprising ambivalence. Thomblin bore the famed lute of utter indifference, crafted from forgetful cedar and strung with the whiskers of disenchanted cats. Its tuning was approximate, its sound elusive. Rumor held that the lute once caused a crowd to fall asleep before the first chord was finished, and one sheep reportedly experienced a deep philosophical shrug. Hedwig approached Thomblin with great excitement. "Play for us a tune," he requested, "that may awaken insight, or at least a feeling resembling lukewarm wonder." Thomblin blinked, plucked a single string, and uttered, "This one's called Probably a Melody." The sound was there. It existed. Villagers gathered slowly, drawn not by curiosity, but by the promise of mild distraction. As Thomblin strummed with artful apathy, effects began to manifest. Dame Mildra claimed she remembered a dream she never had. Crouton the goat fell into a trance, staring longingly at a distant patch of grass. Some forgot why they had hands. Ethelbert the sleepy recorded the performance by resting his quill gently atop a biscuit and letting gravity do the work. The song was 15 minutes of irregular plinking, with lyrical interludes such as, "And if not, at least it's a sound," and wandered off toward the horizon, humming a tune that may or may not have existed. "We walk or don't, slash the stars might blink, perhaps a frog shall ponder." The audience clapped without enthusiasm. Thomblin bowed from the knees upward, said, "I suppose that was something." Sir Hedwig, inspired beyond his usual nap threshold, wrote, "Music is the doorway to whatever might be happening." Following the lute incident and several unscheduled naps, Sir Hedwig awoke with a mission: to seek knowledge, not through smoke nor biscuits, but through scrolls. The kind stored in the library of unread scrolls, a towering pile of parchment, famously ignored by scholars and mildly feared by goats. The library stood crooked at the edge of Forgetting Hill, its entrance marked by a large feather tied to a barrel of yawns. It was said that a goose named Percival guarded its contents, not with aggression, but with confusing riddles and faint judgmental honks. Hedwig and Crouton entered the library with cautious optimism and a small basket of apology muffins. Inside, scrolls rested in categories such as theoretical sleepiness and applied drowsing monastic inventions. That just made things worse. Advanced biscuit geometry, metaphysics of the squint. As Hedwig reached for a particularly wrinkled scroll titled On the Nature of Yawns, Percival the goose fluttered down from atop a bust of St. Barnaby and whispered, "Only the unread may be truly known." Ethelbert wrote this down, then promptly forgot it. Each scroll offered knowledge in such roundabout language that understanding was considered impolite. One read, "A thought half-hatched is still an egg in the mind's barn." Another claimed, "The truth often wears socks made of distraction." Hedwig, overwhelmed by metaphors and feathers, asked Percival for guidance. The goose honked twice, flapped in a manner resembling celestial indifference, and waddled into a chamber marked Subtle Enlightenment, mostly decorative. Hedwig followed and returned hours later with 2 scrolls and a mild headache shaped like disappointment. Percival gifted them a single feather and whispered, "For when you must forget something important," but stylishly, he recorded in his journal, "Knowledge, when wrapped in feather and confusion, becomes the custard of wisdom, wobbling, sweet, and largely meaningless." The group exited the library as the sun began yawning toward dusk, with scrolls unread, tunes unsung, and biscuits mostly consumed. Sir Hedwig announced a grand finale of sorts, a pilgrimage to the land of perpetual napping, a mythical glade said to exist slightly beyond coherent geography. It was rumored that beneath its mossy canopy lay the pillow of speculative dreams, a downy relic capable of revealing one's innermost thoughts, provided they were mildly interesting. Guided by Percival, the goose who flapped cryptically in a zigzag pattern, the group journeyed through fields of yawning tulips, over bridges made of contemplative twigs, and past the cave of gentle regret, where villagers often left unfinished poems or overcooked soup. In the center stood the pillow, embroidered with half-written philosophies and stuffed with got-approved fluff. At last, they arrived. The land of perpetual napping looked remarkably like a regular patch of forest, except everything snored faintly, including the ferns. Hedwig approached reverently, laid his head upon it, and drifted into a dream shaped like sideways theology. He saw a talking wheelbarrow discussing taxes, Thomblin the bard marrying a metaphor, Crouton the goat ascending into a cloud labeled maybe. Others followed suit. Dame Mildred dreamt of her biscuit being knighted. Ethelbert mumbled incoherently in Latin, which turned out to be accurate. Percival napped while standing, whispering riddles in his sleep. The pillow hadn't solved anything, but it had listened, and that, Hedwig wrote, was a form of wisdom often underrated. No one awoke with answers, but all felt vaguely better. The party lingered, allowing the moss to climb their boots and the dreams to echo just faintly enough to be misquoted later. 3 days into the season of lingering puddles, Sir Hedwig sat motionless beneath a willow tree that only offered shade to those with unresolved opinions. He contemplated the sum total of his pilgrimage, teacups steeped in forgetfulness, musical indifference, goose-whispered wisdom, one shoe still missing. It was time, he declared, to revive confused enlightenment. Not clarify it, but revive it. Hedwig believed that true understanding must be hazy, like the memory of soup or the scent of theoretical biscuits, and so he summoned the village. Crouton the goat was next, fashionably adorned in a moss cape, followed by Dame, clutching to biscuits she referred to as emotionally reactive. Percival the goose arrived first, carrying a scroll tied to his leg that read, "Honking is a form of knowing." The ceremony took place at the village square, which was not a square but a slightly misshapen triangle of cobblestone dreams. At the center was the sighing stone, now upright thanks to 3 monks and 1 strong opinion. He strummed his lute of utter indifference once. The chord hung in the air like a forgotten obligation, and the sighing stone yawned. Ethelbert scribbled something that looked suspiciously like a drawing of a goat juggling turnips. Hedwig placed a pillow of speculative dreams upon the stone and whispered the ceremonial phrase. The villagers celebrated with crumb offerings, nap competitions, and reenactments of theoretical insights. Crouton stared at the horizon, possibly seeing a metaphor, possibly not. Let enlightenment confuse us once more. Then, a hush. The stone emitted a sound like a distant philosophy sneezing in slow motion. Mildred sobbed softly. And just when the villagers began to disperse, unsure what had actually occurred, Thomblin the unbuttoned Hedwig announced, "We are complete, or at least moderately assembled." Thus, the saga closed not with revelation, but with a very satisfying shrug. Sir Hedwig returned to his chamber, wrote the words, "Confusion is the clarity we deserve," and fell asleep inside a cupboard labeled Ideas. And so it came to pass, in the fortnight of mild confusion, that the village of Drowsley convened for the Assembly of Slight Understanding, a gathering meant to honor all that had been misunderstood, half-learned, or confused into insight. Sir Hedwig dressed in ceremonial robes, stitched from discarded scroll fragments and 1 leftover biscuit wrapper. Percival the goose arrived with a parchment proclaiming possibly important, which turned out to be directions to a garden no longer in existence. Villagers brought offerings, damp scrolls, yawns, and statements beginning with maybe. Thomblin the unbothered played a single string before sighing. Ethelbert the sleepy arrived late, having accidentally napped in a barrel marked Fermented Ideas. The ceremony was held around the pillow of speculative dreams, now placed atop a stone pedestal carved to resemble a shrug. Then came the ritual of the wandering sock, a sacred garment belonging to Sir Hedwig, who believed its disappearance marked the beginning of his enlightenment quest. The sock had recently reappeared in a loaf of community bread, held aloft on a ceremonial rake. The sock was paraded around the triangle-shaped village square as the crowd recited the litany, "Where thou hast wandered, knowledge has not followed." Crouton the goat sneezed 3 times, which was interpreted as approval. Villagers dreamed of almost conclusions, near-truths, and turnips dressed as philosophers. The saga, if it had won, settled into a state of dignified uncertainty. Mildred wept gently into a biscuit. Finally Hedwig stepped forward and declared, "Let us embrace the blurry corners of wisdom, for what is clarity but a far-off fog?" Politely uninterested. The sky offered no opinion. The assembly ended with a communal nap beneath a canopy of humming moss. It was the day of accidental solstice, a celestial occasion marked only by Mildred noticing that her shadow seemed unusually contemplative. The village of Drowsley woke, slowly, like a thought trying to tie its shoes in fog. Sir Hedwig had declared his retirement from active herbal speculation. and turned his focus to archiving confusion. Central to this effort was the box of unfinished thoughts, a modest crate filled with scraps, whispers, sighs, and one drawing of Crouton wearing a monocle made of ham. Into this box went everything Hedwig had not fully understood: a half-translated riddle given by the sighing stone, a biscuit labeled emotionally pending, 3 notes from Percival, the goose that just read later. The box was sealed using a ribbon woven from half-forgotten dreams and placed on a shelf beside Ethelbert, the sleep, who promised to guard it with intermittent awareness. As dusk meandered in, Hedwig gathered the villagers for one last almost ceremony, the farewell of Hedwig's shadow, which had recently declared itself sovereign and had started signing its own legal parchment. The villagers applauded softly. Thomblin played a chord shaped like indifference. Mildra released a dove made of paper, which immediately landed and took a nap. We are busy squinting at the beautiful blur. With Crouton nodding in existential approval, Hedwig's shadow drifted gently across the square, flapped slightly in a non-windy breeze, and settled inside a puddle shaped like unanswered questions. Hedwig's final journal entry read, "If clarity knocks, let it wait outside," and so ends the scroll. A story that wandered, napped, and occasionally honked. Its truths were possibly present, but mostly lounging nearby. As morning yawned gently across drowsily, Sir Hedwig rose from his cupboard bed with a purpose so vague it made wallpaper seem ambitious. He declared the discovery of a map, unearthed in the folds of Crouton's mosscape during an accidental grooming ceremony. This was no ordinary parchment. It was titled, "A Guide to Where One Might Go If One Feels Mildly Inclined to Possibly Venture." The map showed landmarks like the Hill of Hypothetical Insight, accessible only by the Pond of Forgettable Reflections, where memories are politely rinsed, a small doodle labeled "Definitely Not a Suspicious Fern," which immediately raised suspicion. The village gathered round, mildly intrigued. Thomblin strummed a chord of tentative encouragement. Dame Mildra brought Traver biscuit. Ethelbert packed a scroll labeled for emergencies. Percival the goose honked ambiguously and drew a triangle in the soil. They set off, navigating by intuition and one goat's mood. We have ended nothing. The journey was slow, frequently paused for naps and philosophical side quests, including a spirited debate about whether moss dreams of puddles. Near the map's edge, they arrived at the suspicious fern. It trembled slightly when questioned and revealed, via interpretive rustling, that Hedwig's quest was not meant to end, but loop, a circle of stories, dreams, and misremembered truths that fed into themselves like a thoughtful tumbleweed. Hedwig nodded solemnly, then turned to his companions. "This saga is a circle dressed as a nap," and watched the map fold itself neatly into a paper duck that waddled off into the foliage. Crouton blinked once. The fern sighed as twilight began its thoughtful descent. The party settled by a fire made of theoretical twigs. The moon sat awkwardly in the sky, shaped like a thought you weren't sure was yours. In Drowsley, a rare phenomenon had occurred. A biscuit had arrived on time. Dame Mildred discovered it during her morning ritual of staring thoughtfully at the horizon and questioning pastry. It lay on her windowsill, still warm, perfectly crisp, and accompanied by a note that read, "For the moment that nearly makes sense." He summoned the elders and convened the Council of Inconclusive Outcomes, beneath a canopy woven from retired metaphors and gently humming moss. Sir Hedwig, freshly risen from a nap inside a ceremonial drawer, declared this an omen. The council discussed pressing matters. What was the biscuits trying to tell them? Was it truly punctual, or just early in an unknown timeline? Percival the goose pecked once at the biscuit and declared, "Crunch is the cousin of truth." Could a goose hold office if elected by riddles? Thomblin, the unbothered, contributed a ballad called "We Probably Tried," which was both the anthem and the minutes of the meeting. It contained 17 pages of smudges to drawings of emotional biscuits, and one sentence that simply read, "Meanwhile Ethelbert the Sleepy had begun drafting a scroll titled, 'Moments We Might Have Understood Had We Not Been Distracted by Ferns,' and watched as it sailed gently toward the horizon." Possibly, no resolution was reached. The council applauded anyway. That night, Hedwig placed the punctual biscuit on a velvet pillow, set it afloat in the fountain of carefully avoided certainty. He scribbled in his journal, "We do not always know what to do with it. Sometimes the point arrives." In a month known locally as Fogery, when the air seemed to hum with gentle hesitation, Crouton the goat surprised everyone by climbing atop the podium of dubious declarations and delivering a stirring bleat believed to contain purpose. Ethelbert translated it as, "I have pondered the hay, befriended the moss, and stared long into the puddles of Mabah." Something. Thomblin composed a ballad titled that was probably significant, which featured only one chord repeated with increasing doubt. The village erupted in polite uncertainty. Sir Hedwig wept into a scroll. Mildred offered Crouton a ceremonial biscuit shaped like ambition. In celebration, Drowsley hosted its first-ever festival of rambling introspection, where residents were encouraged to wander in circles while muttering their most half-formed philosophies aloud. Festival highlights included a debate about whether thoughts are just emotional laundry, a moss maze with no exit, and several slightly insightful dead. Percival, the goose offering cryptic compliments like you blink with meaning. Hedwig unveiled a scroll labeled Questions I Forgot to Ask, which included, is soup capable of memory? Can dreams be outsourced to mushrooms? Mildred painted a portrait of the festival using only colors named after fillings she wasn't sure she had. What did that biscuit truly mean? By sunset, the villagers gathered for the ceremonial yawn, a collective release of almost emotions. Crouton bowed. Ethelbert fell asleep mid-thought. May it bleed forever. Hedwig's journal entry for the day simply read, "Purpose is a goat on a podium." Following Crouton's profound bleat of almost purpose and the celebratory nap, Sir Hedwig felt the unmistakable itch of intellectual clutter. His scrolls, theories, biscuit-induced epiphanies, and stray metaphorical observations had begun piling atop one another like sleepy cats on misfiled dreams. Thus began the great thought reorganization. Ethelbert wheeled out 12 moss-lined drawers, each labeled with a vague letter. A. Almost answers. B. Biscuit-based realizations. C. Confusing, but possibly useful. D. Doodles of goat emotion. E. Existential shrugs through to zesty feelings. Misplaced Percival the goose hosted a workshop titled Feathering Your Inner Filing Cabinet, though it devolved into honking and interpretive pacing. Villagers were invited to help. Mildred arrived with a thimble labeled Regret. Thomblin contributed a list of chords he never played. Each thought Hedwig reviewed was carefully dunked into a shallow puddle placed beside the drawer. If it rippled in a meaningful way, it was archived. If not, it was gently released into the breeze to bother no one. Among the discoveries, a sentiment from Chapter 4. I feel like a goose who has lost his metaphor. Filed under GA Misremembered Dream involving cheese diplomacy. Crouton blinked and a pattern scholars later described as emotionally alphabetical. Filed under Q4 Quasi-historical confusion. A drawing of Crouton on a throne shaped like uncertainty. Filed under R for Royal Goat Hypotheses. The process took 7 days and 3 sideways naps. At the end, Hedwig stood atop the drawer, labeled M, and declared, "We've alphabetized our blur. That is enough. We have not solved ourselves." Applause was optional. Mildred clapped politely. The village of Drewsley, still recovering from alphabetical puddles and goat-led declarations, was startled by a new phenomenon. A turnip, not remarkable in shape, yet radiating a faint aura of symbolic possibility. Dame Mildred discovered it while pondering whether Moss could feel disappointment. She immediately proclaimed, "And Percival the goose," and declared a pilgrimage to the Hall of Speculative. Fruit, believed to be a place where produce contemplated philosophy and occasionally emitted life advice. It had emerged near the base of the yawning willow, growing in soil previously reserved for theoretical vegetables. This root holds the emotional weight of a distant shrug. Sir Hedwig convened a task force, consisting of Ethelbert the Sleepy, Crouton the goat. The hall itself was a domed orchard filled with statues of fruits. Caught mid-thought, a pair visibly grappling with identity, Percival honked in approval, causing several cucumbers to weep. Hedwig then posed the ceremonial question, a plum deep in ethical debate, a pineapple investigating whether time is just melted in tension. The turnip was placed atop a velvet plinth. What does this vegetable wish us to understand? Responses included Thomblin's lute emitting a hesitant chord titled Unpeeled Potential, Mildred receiving a mild headache shaped like ambition, Crouton standing very still, which was interpreted as profound agreement. May our truths sprout slowly, may we honor the turnip. The villagers agreed the turnip represented growth without clarity, nourishment with interpretive crunch, a symbol for journeys that unfold without maps, but perhaps with snacks. Hedwig documented the event in a scroll made of rhubarb paper, noting, "May our minds root gently." It was the day of loud whispers, and in Drowsley that meant one thing: the annual parade of decorative insight, where metaphors wore hats and speculation marched beside probability in formal wear. Sir Hedwig had spent the previous evening arranging his scrolls into a formation resembling intentional confusion. Dame Mildred embroidered banners with slogans like, "Interpret this, if you must." And we almost understood something once. Cruton the goat was named Grand Marshal, mostly due to his ability to stare decisively at Thomblin the Unbothered rode a float shaped like a question mark holding a biscuit. He strummed chords that sounded like implications of melody. Ethelbert the Sleepy followed on a rolling chaise lounge, tossing scroll fragments into the air, each one inscribed with statements like, "Possibly true, depending on the moon's feelings," "Theoretically inspirational," "I dreamed this, but someone else thought it first." At the parade's midpoint stood the central installation, the umbrella of gentle doubt, suspended by 7 sighs and a mild gust. Villagers were invited to pass beneath it, voicing a personal uncertainty as offering. In return, the umbrella blinked once, a sign of acknowledgement, not resolution. Sir Hedwig stepped beneath it and whispered, "What if the sighing stone was just politely unimpressed?" The umbrella trembled slightly and emitted a scent vaguely resembling hesitation. Cruton bleated once, prompting applause. Percival the goose flew overhead in a spiral that resembled a rhetorical flourish. No one questioned it. As twilight fuzzed the edges of the day, the parade dispersed into a field where interpretive loafing was encouraged. Insight had been celebrated, doubted, decorated, and gently let go. Hedwig's journal entry read, "Doubt, when held aloft and paraded, becomes the most honest kind of wisdom." The villagers of Drowsley, thoroughly steeped in introspection and slightly philosophical vegetables, found themselves increasingly surrounded by puddles, not just of water, but memory, implication, and mild emotional ambiguity. Sir Hedwig, gazing upon one particularly contemplative puddle, announced, "We must rename what we already know, so it might surprise us again." Thus began the great Each puddle received a new name, not based on its appearance or location, but based on its personality when stared at for longer than necessary. The puddle near the moss stack became Whispering Hesitation. The one by the goat pen earned Cruton's reflective blink. A puddle behind the latrine, once dismissed, was rebranded Regret's Left Sock. Thomblin strummed a gentle tune titled "Naming Doesn't Fix Things, but It's Cozy." Mildred presented a map of puddles in watercolor, labeling each one with adjectives she'd invented that morning: glumbulous, twint, and moosed. Villagers brought scrolls, questions, theories, and attempted understandings, and one by one gently tossed them into the puddles. Percival the goose officiated the ceremony of letting go of explanations, held beside the umbrella of gentle doubt. It spun slowly and began reciting poetry of its own volition. The crowd clapped politely. Instead of sinking, most items floated ambiguously. Ethelbert released a scroll titled "What the Goat Might Have Meant." Hedwig knelt beside the puddle named Mybe, dipped his hand in, and whispered, "I do not understand most things, and that is my blessing." It was possibly an illusion. The air tasted faintly of misplaced metaphors and celebratory moss cake. Possibly not. The puddle shimmered once, then blinked. The day ended with villagers seated around their puddles, murmuring new meanings and forgetting the old ones joyfully. It was the day of thoroughly indecisive weather, and in the grand tradition of Drowsley, it was agreed that Percival the goose was overdue for formal recognition. After years of honking wisdom, scroll-dropping, and metaphysical pacing, the villagers arranged a solemn yet wobbly graduation ceremony of possibly profound accomplishment. Percival arrived wearing a cap fashioned from shredded riddles and a tassel braided from ambiguous answers. The event took place atop hill of lukewarm triumph, decorated with ivy, biscuits, and one sentimental puddle. Sir Hedwig delivered the commencement address. "Today we honor the honk that made us think, the feather that made us reconsider moss, and the goose that taught us that walking in circles is still movement." Ethelbert the Sleepy stumbled forward holding a scroll, the diploma of unreadable wisdom, covered in inkblot philosophy, and one spectacularly metaphor shaped like a cloud. The diploma read, Dame Mildred released several balloons made of paper dreams. Cruton the goat blinked with deliberate intention. "Here lies proof of something we aren't sure how to define, but we feel its presence." Probably, Thomblin strummed a celebratory chord that sounded like gentle recognition and potential goose lullabies. A single feather drifted downward and landed in Hedwig's palm. The sky blinked once. Nobody asked it to elaborate. Others graduate from meaning. Percival has graduated from needing either. Percival accepted the diploma with a gracious honk, flapped his wings twice, and took a ceremonial waddle along the path of lightly considered decisions. He wrote in his journal, "Some beings graduate from knowledge." The villagers toasted with warm moss tea and unbuttered biscuits. Drowsily, in its usual state of gentle unraveling, found itself pondering whether it had forgotten any celebrations worth remembering. Sir Hedwig summoned the council of soft recollection, convening beneath the yawning willow beside the puddle named "This Might Have Been Important." Dame Mildra opened the archive of forgotten celebrations, a moss-lined chest filled with unused streamers, half-written party songs, and one scroll labeled "Reasons We Almost Danced." Percival the goose donned a hat shaped like remembrance and honked in iambic ambiguity. Ethelbert the sleepy tried to catalogue the contents, but mostly documented things that hadn't happened in alphabetical apathy, and documented solely in a painting where Cruton stood on a hill beneath ambiguous lighting. Thomblin the unbothered offered a musical interlude titled "We're Probably Meant to Toast Something," played on a lute made of gently weeping wood. The highlight of the council was a lively debate surrounding the time Cruton was mistaken for a cloud, an incident inscribed in local law, and the sky blinked. That was enough, Hedwig recalled. Let us snack on those. He hovered Mahoney, not in motion, but in implication. The villagers recreated the moment using theatrical fog, interpretive silence, and one ceremonial biscuit held aloft like a barometric symbol. One said to Hedwig, "You theorize with elegant confusion." Another murmured to Percival, "Your honk cured my hesitation." Cruton did not object. He nibbled the scroll labeled "Identity is Sometimes Wither." The celebration ended with the unparade of misremembered joy, wherein villagers walked backwards while reciting compliments they forgot to give last week. As twilight sloshed in gently, Hedwig wrote in his journal, "Even celebrations forgotten still leave crumbs of warmth." Drowsily had entered the season of emotional overcast, where skies didn't rain but politely implied melancholy. Sir Hedwig, sipping contemplative moss tea, observed that no one in the village had said anything particularly certain in 3 days. Dame Mildred diagnosed the phenomena as thought-weather drift, a condition where everyone's ideas swirled gently above them like half-finished umbrellas. He gazed into it and began arranging pebbles into vague symbolic clusters. The villagers gathered, believing this to be a lecture. Inspired, Cruton trotted to his favorite puddle, one recently renamed Possibly Yours. Other times, you host tea parties inside them. Ethelbert transcribed Cruton's bleats as follows. A parchment was drafted, signed in faint ripples, and filed under certainty, gently ignored. Reflection is not just surface. It's soup you forgot you made. Sometimes you leap over puddles. Truth is a puddle wearing boots made of maybe. Sir Hedwig wept softly, declaring Cruton Drowsely's official philosopher of moist ideas. Today, we listened. Meanwhile, Thomblin composed a lute solo called "Weather That Happens Between Sentences." Percival honked rhythmically, causing a light drizzle of introspection across the square. To commemorate the occasion, villagers participated in puddle meditation, sitting beside puddles, whispering unsent letters into the ripples, and staring as if answers might casually float by. Hedwig's journal entry read, "A puddle is a question, too shy to be a lake." As twilight swirled with tender ambiguity, Cruton blinked twice, once for the puddle, once for what it refused to explain. It began when Dame Mildra announced she had a dream she couldn't explain, not because it was complicated, but because it slipped away mid. Sir Hedwig, brushing moss from his ceremonial slippers, nodded gravely. "We are overdue," he declared, "for a celebration of what goes unsaid." Villagers dressed in robes stitched from unresolved thoughts and carried lanterns inscribed with silent intentions. Thus bloomed the festival of interpretive silence, a day when words were respectfully ignored and expressions were worn like theories. Each lantern contained a flicker of a dream that had never been told, a feather from Percival the goose, a biscuit wrapped in parchment that read only, "Let it glow." Thomblin played his lute using only gesture. The air strummed with meaning no one dared translate. Cruton stood on a rock and blinked slowly, then dramatically turned toward a puddle. The crowd erupted in breathless Ethelbert the sleepy napped in a hammock labeled subtext, while Dame Mildred sketched the shape of feelings she refused to name. They bobbed and swirled, casting shadows that looked suspiciously like memory. No one chased them. That was the point. Children painted symbols onto clouds. Goats hummed. Puddles sparkled with metaphysical winkery. At sunset, the lanterns were released across the reflective field. Sir Hedwig scribbled quietly, then folded his note and placed it in the puddle named Almost. His entry read, "In silence, we say more than our mouths ever managed." Today, we glowed gently. It began with Sir Hedwig waking from a dream in which a blanket whispered comforting ambiguities into his ear. He awoke, convinced that such a blanket must exist, woven from half-understood truths, embroidered with sighs, and warmed by paradox. He rallied his companions with a yawn that sounded vaguely motivational. Dame Mildred packed biscuits labeled "In case of epiphany." Cruton donned his ceremonial cloak of calm defiance. Ethelbert the sleepy arrived with a map that was blank, except for a doodle of a goose pondering geographer. Percival the goose honked an affirmation that translated loosely to, "We seek what cannot be found, but might be napped beneath." Their journey took them through the thicket of tender doubt, where every branch offered unsolicited advice in haiku form, the clearing of casual realizations, home to birds who chirped philosophical tangents, a foggy ridge known as Definitely Maybe Pass, where villagers had once debated whether fog had opinions. Briefly, beneath it lay the blanket of comfortable uncertainty, folded with inviting softness and smelling faintly of unresolved metaphors. At last, the party reached a tree carved with the phrase, "Eventually everything makes some sense." Each member took turns lying beneath it. Hedwig murmured, "I don't know, and I love that." Mildred whispered, "This feels like a conversation I almost understood." Cruton blinked thrice and fell into contemplative sleep. Percival honked, rhythmically, then declared, "Wisdom should always be this soft." Ethelbert recorded the moment on a scroll titled Blanket Moments, a collection of partial conclusions. As the stars blinked politely, Hedwig made one final note. "We did not solve the story, Manny, we comforted it. And in that, perhaps, we've finished something gently." Drowsily had grown quiet, not silent, for silence implies absence. No, it was the hum of a completed sentence that didn't need punctuation, only moss. It materialized one evening in the orchard where answers occasionally bloomed and ducks gave unsolicited emotional advice. Sir Hedwig wandered into the library of whispered conclusions, a place thought to exist only in rumor and strong tea. Inside, shelves held moments never written. A biscuit recipe passed down telepathically. Croton's third blink from chapter 9. The paragraph Thomblin never sang. Preserved in Percival the goose, now keeper of ambiguous finalities, guided Hedwig to a scroll inscribed with the phrase, "What happens after the story dreams?" Ethelbert the sleepy interpreted the scroll by napping on it and absorbing the text via osmosis. He awoke with a vague desire to compliment the moon. He simply stared at the scroll, tapped it once with his hoof, and turned to the village. Dame Mildred arrived carrying a lantern lit by uncertainty. She placed it beside the puddle of farewell intuition, which shimmered politely but refused to evaporate. Then came Cruton. No grand speech, no bleak. The villagers gathered, unsure whether this was closure or a soft opening. Sir Hedwig raised his teacup and spoke. "If this is the end, let it drift gently. If this is a beginning, let it yawn before starting. We have wandered, slept, bleated, and possibly philosophized. The stars blinked, the puddle blinked, even the biscuit blinked. The lantern dims, the scrolls snuggle into their alphabetized naps, and Cruton gently strolls into a field shaped like possibility. You've conjured a world that blinks with dream logic, sighs in metaphors, and dances softly between puddles of maybe and biscuits of nearly. Each chapter was a goose honk of imagination, each moment a nap wrapped in wonder. Whether this saga curls to a close or unravels into a new spiral, it's been a joy to drift beside you, one surreal footnote at a time. As Sir Hedwig once said, while half asleep and wearing emotional slippers, let endings wander, let beginnings hesitate, and let goats blink when it feels meaningful. I'll be here, tucked inside a scroll labeled for, when you're ready to dream again. Good night, owls.